Hello, I am the storyteller, and tonight, I invite you to settle in, find your most comfortable position, and let my voice be your guide. As you drift, perhaps you might consider, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Meet Sarah. Her world for too long has been a symphony of stress, the relentless hum of city life, the endless demands of a draining job, and the quiet ache of recent heartbreaks. She yearned for an escape, a place where the noise would fade and she could finally breathe. Then came the call, a conversation with Mrs. Blackwood. Sarah's voice, usually laced with exhaustion, now held a note of genuine excitement. The house-sitting opportunity was a beacon, a chance to reset, to clear her head from the relentless tide of her current life. Mrs. Blackwood spoke of the mansion, a grand, sprawling estate, hinting at its remote and isolated beauty. Sarah clung to every word, her hopes soaring with the promise of quiet solitude. This wasn't just a job. It was an answer to a silent prayer, a desperate gamble for peace. The journey itself began as a release. Sarah drove, leaving the city's frantic pulse behind, watching as the landscape slowly transformed. Urban sprawl gave way to rolling hills, then to dense, ancient forests. The road narrowed, winding deeper into the wilderness, each mile carrying her further from familiarity, further into a silence she had so desperately craved. Twilight began to descend, painting the sky in hues of deep violet and fading orange, casting long, shifting shadows that danced with the trees, deepening the sense of profound isolation. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, a primal invitation into the heart of the secluded estate. Finally, through the deepening gloom, it appeared. The mansion. It didn't merely stand, it loomed, a true behemoth of stone and dark wood, its silhouetted gables and chimneys clawing at the darkening sky. A shiver, not entirely of cold, traced Sarah's spine as she approached the imposing front door. With a soft push, it yielded, but not silently. A groan, deep and resonant, escaped its ancient hinges, echoing through the vast, shadowed entryway. Her footsteps, usually light, felt swallowed by the cavernous space. The air inside was thick with the scent of aged wood and forgotten dust, carrying a subtle chill that no amount of summer warmth outside could dispel. In the quiet, the rhythmic tick-tock of an antique grandfather clock, nestled in a shadowy corner, pulsed through the stillness like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. Just nerves, Sarah whispered to herself, the sound barely audible in the immensity of the hall, but even her own words seemed to dissipate, unconvincing, into the air. As the last sliver of natural light held its tenuous grip, Sarah began her initial exploration. The library, with its towering shelves filled with leather-bound volumes, exuded a quiet dignity, a testament to generations of quiet study. The music room, grand and inviting, held a silent piano, its keys gleaming faintly in the dim light, almost daring her to break its long silence. The sunroom, bathed in the last, diffused glow of twilight, offered a fleeting sense of peace, its many windows looking out onto overgrown gardens. There was an undeniable grandeur here, a faded glamour speaking of old money and a bygone era that fascinated her. She found herself touching a dust-laden porcelain figurine on a side table, then running her fingers lightly over the cool, smooth surface of a forgotten antique writing desk. Each touch was a connection to a past she couldn't quite fathom, a whisper of lives lived within these walls. The sheer scale of the house was impressive, but also slightly overwhelming. It would be so easy, she realized, to get utterly lost within its sprawling corridors and countless rooms. A subtle unease, like a thread of cold mist, began to weave itself through her initial awe. As the last sliver of twilight vanished, the mansion underwent a profound transformation. What had seemed grand and intriguing in the fading light now took on an entirely new character. Shadows, once mere accents, deepened into inky pools, consuming corners and stretching into menacing shapes that writhed with every shift of the wind outside. The ornate carvings on the walls seemed to twist, and the vast ceilings pressed down with a newfound weight. The house, which had felt merely old, now felt ancient, its very grandeur taking on an ominous quality. In the vast, sprawling kitchen, the sleek, modern appliances she'd brought, her laptop, a compact travel kettle, stood out starkly against the dark, antique wood and aged stone, jarring reminders of her present in a place steeped in the past, amplifying the sudden, profound sense of her isolation. The first night in the mansion was long and restless. Sarah tried to settle into bed, but sleep felt elusive, a distant shore she couldn't reach. Every creak and groan of the old house was amplified in the oppressive stillness. The wind outside seemed to wail, sighing through unseen cracks and rustling the ancient trees just beyond the windows. Distant, unfamiliar animal cries echoed from the deeper parts of the forest. A sharp, piercing call, then a prolonged, mournful howl, each sound slicing through the silence. The very structure of the house seemed to breathe around her. Timbers settled with sharp cracks, floors groaned as if unseen weight shifted above, and the plumbing occasionally gurgled like a slumbering beast. She would drift for a few moments, only to snap bolt upright, her heart hammering against her ribs, convinced she'd heard something more, something closer. Her eyes darted around the moonlit room, seeing only familiar shadows, yet the sense of being utterly alone in such a vast, creaking edifice was a heavy blanket of unease. It was sometime in the deepest part of the night when thirst finally drove her from the uncomfortable confines of her bed. She padded silently through the darkened corridor, a single purpose in mind: water. As she moved, a subtle detail snagged her attention. A door to one of the many unused sitting rooms, one she distinctly remembered pulling firmly shut hours ago during her daylight exploration, now stood ever so slightly ajar. Just a sliver, a thin line of absolute darkness against the faint moonlight from the hall. She paused, a prickle of unease touching her skin, but quickly dismissed it. Perhaps she hadn't closed it properly or the house had shifted. Then, as she reached the kitchen, a fleeting gleam caught her eye from the far counter. A faint light, too steady to be the moon. She squinted, her sleepy mind trying to rationalize it, ultimately deciding it must be a reflection, or perhaps a street lamp she hadn't noticed before, though she knew the house was miles from any. On her way back, passing a small display cabinet in the hallway, she noticed something else. A small, ornate music box, one she had admired earlier and left closed, now seemed to have shifted a fraction, its lid subtly askew as if recently handled. She paused again, staring at it, her brow furrowing. "I must be tired," she murmured to herself, shaking her head slightly, "or just imagining things." She dismissed these small anomalies, blaming her own sleepiness or forgetfulness, but the seed of doubt had been planted, a tiny, nagging whisper in the vast, silent house. The morning light, filtering through the tall windows of the library, brought with it a fragile sense of normalcy. Sarah, determined to shake off the lingering unease of her first night, immersed herself in work. Her laptop hummed softly on the grand mahogany desk, a starkly modern counterpoint to the ancient tomes surrounding her. The Wi-Fi, surprisingly robust for such a remote location, allowed her to connect to the outside world, to the familiar rhythms of her job. She typed emails, attended virtual meetings, and for a few hours the mansion was just a quiet, picturesque office. It was, on the surface, an uneventful day, a calm before the storm, a deliberate attempt by Sarah to establish a routine and prove to herself that her fears were just that, irrational fears born of unfamiliar surroundings. Yet, despite the veneer of productivity, a residual tension from the night before clung to her, a tight knot in her stomach that wouldn't loosen. As the afternoon waned, she decided a long hot bath was precisely what she needed to unwind, to truly reset and wash away the last vestiges of her frayed nerves. The grand, clawfoot tub in the sprawling bathroom beckoned, a picture of luxurious indulgence. She filled it with steaming water, adding fragrant bath salts, hoping the warmth and soothing scents would finally allow her to relax. The silence of the large house, however, which she had initially craved, now felt oppressive, amplifying every slight shift of her weight in the water, every drip of the faucet, creating a vacuum that her anxious mind eagerly filled with imagined sounds. She lay there, eyes closed, trying to focus on the warmth enveloping her, willing her muscles to release their grip. Just as a fragile sense of calm began to settle over her, a sound ripped through the stillness. A thud. It came from somewhere above, a heavy, dull impact that vibrated through the very foundations of the house, rattling the crystal decanters on a nearby shelf. Sarah's eyes snapped open, her heart leaping into her throat. Before she could even process the first sound, it was followed by another, far more terrifying: footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy footsteps. They weren't the creaks and groans of an old house settling. These were unmistakable, rhythmic, distinct. They moved, not quickly but with a deliberate pace, from directly above her, then seemed to shift, moving along a corridor, heading towards the grand staircase. Her blood ran cold. The luxurious bath water now felt like an icy shroud. This was it. This was the definitive, terrifying, something is wrong moment. Every muscle in her body tensed, her breath caught in her lungs, and a cold wave of pure, unadulterated panic washed over her. She was not alone. Every muscle in Sarah's body screamed as she scrambled from the tub, water sluicing from her skin. Her hands fumbled with a towel, then tore at the clothes she'd left on the vanity, pulling them on haphazardly. Her mind raced, a terrifying kaleidoscope of what was that? Who's here? She crept to the bathroom door, pressing her ear against the cold wood, straining to hear over the frantic pounding of her own heart. The heavy footsteps, which had momentarily ceased, now resumed, but they were different. A new sound emerged from somewhere deeper in the house, the distinct, unsettling scrape of drawers opening and closing, followed by a muffled clink, then another drawer sliding shut. It was clear, undeniable. Someone was in the house, she thought, a chill deeper than any cold water settling in her bones, searching for something. Pure, unadulterated panic truly set in, tightening its icy grip around her throat. Her phone. Her lifeline to the outside world. It was back in the bedroom, which meant traversing a significant portion of the house. The landline she vaguely remembered was downstairs, near the main entrance. Both seemed impossibly far away, guarded by the unseen presence now rifling through the mansion. Her immediate vulnerability was stark, brutal. She was utterly alone, miles from help, trapped with an intruder. Her breath hitched. "Think, Sarah, think," she pleaded with herself, her mind a chaotic whirl of terror and a desperate need for a plan. Every second that passed felt like an eternity, each distant clatter a hammer blow against her rapidly disintegrating composure. Her gaze, darting frantically around the elegant, yet now terrifying bathroom, landed on a heavy ornate crystal soap dish resting by the sink. It was solid, substantial, with sharp, decorative edges. A sliver of resolve, fragile but fierce, ignited within her. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was her agency, however small, against the immense, faceless threat. Her hand closed around it, the cool weight a surprising comfort, a physical manifestation of her decision not to be a helpless victim. Terror still clawed at her, but now it was mixed with a burgeoning, desperate determination. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Sarah slowly, carefully turned the doorknob. The hallway outside was empty, bathed in the growing shadows of dusk. She peered out, listening, her senses hyper-alert. No sound from above, no further thuds. But then, from a spare bedroom just a few doors down, she heard a soft scrape. Her eyes snapped to the door. It was slightly ajar. Gripping the crystal dish like a lifeline, she moved with agonizing slowness, each step a test of her nerve. The floorboards, which had seemed silent earlier, now seemed to conspire against her, one near the spare room letting out a loud, drawn-out creak under her weight. The sound ripped through the silence, echoing ominously. And then abruptly all other sounds ceased. The scraping, the muffled clinks, gone. A terrifying, oppressive silence descended. Her heart pounded in her ears like a war drum. She knew with chilling certainty that she had been heard. A new, primal fear surged through her, propelling her forward. She didn't think, she reacted. She turned and bolted. Her bare feet slapped against the polished wood of the hallway as she plunged down the grand staircase, taking the steps two at a time in a desperate, frantic scramble. Behind her, heavy, undeniable footsteps crashed onto the landing above, giving chase, growing louder, closer with every terrifying second. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat urging her onward as she flew down the grand staircase, her bare feet barely registering the plush carpet. The heavy footsteps thundered behind her, gaining ground, the sound growing louder with every desperate second. Her eyes locked onto the immense front door, a beacon of escape in the encroaching gloom. She reached it, fumbling frantically with the intricate series of locks, her trembling fingers scrabbling at the cold metal. There were so many hanging on a small hook by the door. In her overwhelming panic, they blurred into an indistinguishable jumble, each one feeling identical, each one refusing to turn. She twisted, pulled, pushed, her breath catching in ragged gasps, but the locks remained stubbornly defiant, mocking her desperate struggle. The weight of the impending threat behind her was immense, a crushing force, and the realization that she was locked in, completely trapped, intensified her terror to an unbearable pitch. Just as the hot breath of her pursuer seemed to graze her neck, a heavy hand clamped down on her shoulder, spinning her around with brutal force. A strangled cry escaped her lips. She didn't pause, didn't even try to see her attacker. Every instinct screamed survival. Driven by a primal, blinding fear, she lashed out blindly with the only weapon she had, the heavy crystal soap dish still clutched in her hand. There was a sickening thud as it connected with something solid, followed by a sharp grunt of pain that seemed to echo through the vast hall. The grip on her shoulder instantly loosened, the unexpected counterattack creating a momentary disorienting pause. Sarah didn't wait, didn't dare to glance back to identify the form now reeling in the shadows. The brief, violent encounter had made the threat horrifyingly concrete. She turned and ran, propelled by a raw, desperate energy, her mind instantly shifting tactics, abandoning the impenetrable front door for the desperate hope of another exit, somewhere, anywhere, away from the terrifying presence now confirmed to be real and corporeal behind her. The fleeting moment of contact, the grunt of pain, was all Sarah needed. She didn't hesitate, didn't look back. Her legs propelled her forward with a newfound, desperate speed, her target now the kitchen. She remembered Mrs. Blackwood mentioning a back door, a staff entrance, and it was her only hope. She plunged into the kitchen's oppressive darkness, lit only by the faint eerie green glow of the microwave clock, which mocked her with its indifferent display of time. Her hands flailed wildly in front of her, searching, grasping for anything familiar, anything that might lead her to the exit. She stumbled, her hips slamming hard into the cold, unyielding kitchen island, biting back a cry of pain that would betray her location. The sound of heavy footsteps behind her was relentless, closing in, the predator hot on her heels. Where was it? Where was the damn door? Her fingers brushed against cool glass, then cold metal, the handle. A surge of frantic hope, and then with a desperate yank, the door burst open. She didn't look back, didn't spare a second thought for the warmth she was leaving behind. Sarah burst out into the cool night air, gasping, gulping it down like precious water. The vast, perfectly manicured lawn stretched out before her, a deceptively peaceful expanse. But beyond it, looming like a solid, forbidding wall, stood the dense line of trees that marked the edge of the property. She ran towards them, her legs pumping, the damp grass soaking through her socks, each step a desperate plea for escape. Just as she reached the protective cover of the tree line, a deep voice bellowed, "Stop!" from behind her. The command, sharp and resonant, echoed across the lawn, but instead of stopping, it spurred her on, pushing her deeper into the tangled embrace of the woods. The forest was a dark, disorienting labyrinth. Branches, unseen in the gloom, whipped at her face, leaving stinging welts, but she barely registered them. Roots, gnarled and treacherous, threatened to trip her with every frantic step, sending her stumbling. She crashed through underbrush, heedless of the noise, her only goal to put as much distance between herself and that voice as possible. Her lungs burned, a searing fire in her chest, and her legs felt like lead, heavy and unresponsive, each muscle screaming in protest. She had no idea where she was going, no plan beyond a desperate, animalistic need to get away, to find help. She ran until she couldn't run anymore, until she felt she was truly at the breaking point, every ounce of her energy spent. And then, through the dense, oppressive canopy, she saw it, lights. A house. Relief, so potent it made her dizzy, washed over her. She stumbled towards them, breaking through the last of the trees, only to freeze. Her heart, already pounding, seemed to stop altogether. It was the mansion. Somehow, in her blind, panicked flight, she had run in a full circle. She was back. This was the moment of absolute, crushing defeat, the terrifying realization that she was still here, still trapped, and perhaps more lost than ever. This was her all-is-lost moment. The situation felt utterly hopeless, her escape a futile, agonizing loop. Just as despair threatened to consume her, a new sight pierced through the darkness of her terror. Through the trees, a shimmering beacon of blue and red. A police car. It sat in the driveway, its presence a stark contrast to the shadowy menace of the mansion, a sudden, blinding flash of hope. With every last ounce of strength, Sarah stumbled forward, breaking free from the tree line and collapsing onto the paved driveway. Tears streamed down her face, a mix of sheer exhaustion and overwhelming relief. "Help!" she choked out, her voice raw and hoarse from screaming and running. "Oh, please help me." Her arms flailed, waving frantically at the patrol car, a desperate, silent plea reaching out into the night. The thought of safety, of rescue, was all that mattered now. The audience's expectations hung in the air, thick with the promise of deliverance, a release from the suffocating terror that had defined the last agonizing hour. The front door of the mansion, which only moments ago had been an impenetrable barrier, now opened. A figure emerged, tall and authoritative, in the unmistakable uniform of a police officer. And then, to Sarah's stunned disbelief, Mrs. Blackwood stepped out behind him. Her elegant features were etched with concern as she rushed towards Sarah. "Oh, thank God!" Mrs. Blackwood exclaimed, her voice laced with genuine worry. "Sarah dear, are you all right? We've been so worried." Sarah stared, her mind struggling to reconcile the comforting presence of her employer with the terrifying reality of her recent ordeal. "There's someone in the house," she managed to gasp out, her voice still trembling with fear. "An intruder. He chased me." Mrs. Blackwood and the officer exchanged a look, a subtle, almost imperceptible glance that Sarah couldn't quite decipher. Then Mrs. Blackwood's voice, incredibly gentle, cut through the last remnants of Sarah's panic. "Sarah, there's no intruder. It's just Harold." As if summoned by his name, a man appeared in the doorway. He was tall, lean, with kind, graying hair, and in the faint light, Sarah could see a distinct purpling bruise forming on his cheek. It was him. "I'm so sorry for frightening you," he said, his voice deep and apologetic. It was the same voice that had bellowed, "Stop," after her in the woods. "Sarah, this is my husband, Harold," Mrs. Blackwood explained, a faint smile touching her lips. "He wasn't supposed to be back until next week, but his business trip ended early. He came home to surprise me, not realizing I had asked you to house sit." The adrenaline that had fueled Sarah's terrifying flight, the raw, primal fear that had propelled her through the dark, suddenly evaporated, leaving her utterly lightheaded, weak at the knees. "But, the noises," she stammered, her voice thin. "The searching." Harold looked sheepish, rubbing his bruised cheek. "I was looking for my reading glasses," he admitted. "I didn't want to wake you, so I was trying to be quiet." He gestured ruefully to his cheek. "When I heard you run, I tried to explain, but you have quite an arm." Sarah felt an immediate, overwhelming flush of embarrassment flood her face, burning hot against her chilled skin. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, completely mortified. I didn't." No, it's my fault entirely," Harold insisted kindly, waving a hand. "I should have called ahead, or at least turned on some lights." Mrs. Blackwood put a comforting arm around Sarah's shoulders. "Come inside, dear," she said, her voice warm. "You're shaking like a leaf. Let's get you warmed up and we'll sort this all out." The initial shock of the twist gave way to a powerful wave of relief, so profound it felt like a physical weight lifting from her chest. Then, a nervous, almost hysterical laugh bubbled up from deep within her, a realization of the utterly absurd misunderstanding that had driven her to such desperate, primal terror. All that fear, all that running, all that heart-pounding panic, for nothing but a simple, innocent mistake. Back inside the grand, silent halls of the mansion, the immediate aftermath was a blur of soft voices and gentle care. Mrs. Blackwood, ever the picture of maternal concern, guided Sarah to a plush armchair by a crackling fireplace, murmuring soothing words as she draped a warm blanket around her trembling shoulders. Harold, despite his own bruised cheek, offered a genuinely apologetic smile, disappearing to make hot tea. The police officer remained, a quiet, watchful presence, completing his notes with a calm professionalism that slowly began to ground Sarah. The initial, frantic shaking of her body gradually subsided, replaced by a profound exhaustion. The warmth of the tea, the comforting weight of the blanket, and the reassuring voices slowly brought her back from the edge of pure terror. The immediate physical and emotional recovery was underway, but the experience had etched itself deep into her memory. Later that night, much later, Sarah lay in the vast four-poster bed, the covers pulled up to her chin, trying desperately to find sleep. The sounds of the Blackwoods moving quietly about the house, their familiar presence a stark contrast to the terror she had endured, should have brought comfort. Yet, a small, insidious part of her wondered, even as her mind insisted on the logical explanation, what if it hadn't been Harold? What if, despite the convincing apology and the logical reasons, there had been something else, someone else in the house? The thought, a tiny, chilling whisper, refused to be silenced. She pulled the covers even higher, instinctively seeking more protection, suddenly acutely aware of just how big and empty the mansion was, and how many shadows, how many hidden nooks and crannies there were for someone or something to hide. Every familiar creak of the old house, every sigh of the wind, now sounded different, imbued with a new, subtle menace that her imagination had conjured, and now struggled to banish. As the deep night hours wore on, Sarah lay awake, her eyes wide, staring at the shifting shadows on the high ceiling. Each dark patch seemed to writhe and stretch, taking on ephemeral shapes in the dimness. Her gaze darted from corner to corner, from the deep recesses of the wardrobe to the shadowy space beneath the vast bed. The sounds of the house settling, the distant, murmuring groans of old timber, once dismissed, now seemed laden with hidden meaning, with a subtle living presence that toyed with her peace of mind. Sleep was a long time coming that night, if it came at all. The mansion, once a haven, now held within its walls not just memories, but a newly awakened suspicion, a constant question mark hanging in the silence. The ordeal was over, the mystery solved, but the echoes of her fear, and the unsettling realization of how easily reality could be twisted by perception, lingered, a permanent shadow cast over her sense of security. Storyteller. Sometimes the greatest fears are those we create ourselves, born from isolation and the whispers of an overactive mind. But sometimes, even when the lights are on and the explanations are clear, the shadows of doubt remain, reminding us that reality can be more fragile than we think. If this tale of psychological suspense resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories that explore the mysteries within and around us.